understanding that informed consent is a process for sharing information aimed to help a client understand how potential actions will implicate their goals for therapy, I searched for an example as instructed. The one I chose to download for this assignment was from jotform.com. I was a ways into comparing and contrasting before I realized it was a template from a form building website and not a counseling firm's finished informed consent form. My first thought was that it was plain vanilla, pretty generic, and I wondered if it would support the letter of the law referenced in the ACA Code of Ethics purpose. After I started digging into how it compared with the code recommendations, which closely align with those of my home state of Maryland, I found it actually covered a great deal of what's needed, and perhaps, because it's a template, by the time it's personalized, it could meet all of the recommendations. Some of the examples from section A2 of information variables that would need to be carefully detailed in creating the final form include a discussion of the techniques to be used, limitations and the potential risks and benefits, the counselor's credentials, education, and experience that qualify them to offer counseling, the counselor's approach to counseling, confidentiality, what information must divulge as a matter of law, terminating the counseling relationship and/or stopping and starting counseling, testing and evaluation that will be utilized, the right to refuse and consequences of refusing both the counseling and any modality that is offered, implications of any diagnosis, the role of technology, fees and billing procedures. These items are hinted at in the template, but detail would definitely need to be added by anyone hoping to create their own final form from it. And this is not an exhaustive list due to the time that's allotted here. The things that I really liked about the form, though, were the overall design. It seems logical, and it has a flow that makes sense to me. That thought may come in part from years of developing forms in a previous career, and my own dislike of the disjointedness and redundancy in completing intake forms when I go to a new healthcare provider. Seriously, how many times do they need you to write your email address out? I like that the client's rights are explicitly spelled out in the template. I like that it invites the client to self-reflection in choosing the reason that they're seeking counseling. Without giving an overwhelming amount of choices, it invites honest discussion. I also like that the signature block, signaling consent, that includes contact information. I can really see this as a component of a streamlined and client-friendly intake. While I was looking for my example form, an article from the NIH library came up in my search. It shared from the March 2012 Canadian Medical Association Journal, and while a bit old, it does make some really interesting points about Let me try that sentence one more time. It shared from the March 2012 Canadian Medical Association Journal, and while that's a bit old, it makes some really interesting points about informed consent procedures that I think remain relevant and important to consider. They begin by recognizing that in different contexts, informed consent can have different meanings, and that can be confusing. They also concede that informed consent isn't practiced in an ideal way, and that variability exists because it is a complicated issue. The complications come because it's trying to use one document to address issues of legal, ethical, and administrative compliance. And the purposes of each of these compliance areas overlap, but they are not identical. And that introduces variability, not necessarily intentional, depending on what is most important in the eyes of the form's creator. An administrator is going to have a different viewpoint than a lawyer, who is going to see it differently than a clinician, who will make other choices about what is most important than either the lawyer or the administrator. What was really highlighted was the importance of informed consent, of being thoughtful and careful in creating the forms and gathering the insight of multiple stakeholders, all while keeping the client's well-being as the number one goal. Thank you.